The night I found the second lease agreement, tucked inside my husband's winter coat, my hands went completely still. Not shaking. Still. The kind of stillness that only comes when your body already understands something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Gordon Hale had spent 26 years telling me we were always just getting by. Too tight to fix the furnace properly. Too tight to replace the car I'd been nervous driving since the transmission started slipping. Too tight. Always too tight. Right up until the moment I was standing in our front hallway with a lease for a downtown condo in Calgary and a monthly rent I could barely believe. And his name at the bottom of every page. I didn't call him. I didn't take a single photo on my phone. I folded the papers back exactly as I'd found them, slid them into the coat pocket, and hung the coat back on the hook. Then I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. Before I tell you how I got there, I want to ask you something. Have you ever held a piece of paper and felt your entire past rearrange itself around it? If you have, you'll know what I mean when I say that some discoveries don't just break your heart. They rewrite every memory you thought you had. If this story sounds familiar, I want to hear from you in the comments. And if you're watching tonight, let me know where you're watching from in Canada. These stories deserve to be heard. If you'd asked anyone on our street in Oakville what they thought of Gordon Hale, they would have smiled. He was the one who helped the Pattersons shovel out after the ice storm. He organized the neighborhood barbecue every August. He coached minor hockey for 11 years and never once asked for gas money. People genuinely liked my husband. I genuinely liked my husband for a very long time. We met in our 20s, was finishing my bookkeeping certificate and working front desk at an accounting firm downtown. Gordon was in property management, confident, practical, good at making decisions quickly. He seemed steady in a way I found reassuring. When we got married, I thought steadiness was the best possible foundation. Our daughter Leanne was born 2 years later, and then our son Paul 3 years after that. By the time Paul started school, Gordon sat me down at our kitchen table with his hands folded together in the careful way he always had, before presenting an idea he'd already decided on. It makes more sense financially if you take on part-time only, he said. With your bookkeeping background, you could do some contract work from home. Keep things flexible. I remember thinking it sounded reasonable. The cost of full-time childcare was real. The stress of juggling it all was real. What I didn't fully understand yet was that Gordon's gift was making control sound like practicality. He could wrap a decision that benefited him inside logic that sounded like it was for everyone, and you'd feel almost grateful for it. So I stepped back, and little by little, over years I didn't count carefully enough, Gordon became the person who handled everything: the investment accounts, the mortgage renewals, the tax filings, the savings. If I asked about something, he answered in a tone that was patient and confident in equal measure, the kind of tone that makes you feel like you're asking about something you should already understand. "We're fine, Beverley, but we have to be smart." That was his line. We have to be smart. I stopped questioning and started adjusting. I bought things on sale and felt proud of myself. I cut subscriptions we didn't need. I found deals. Gordon praised me for it. "You're so practical," he used to say. And I believed him because I didn't know yet that the praise was part of the system. The first real sign came about 3 years ago. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing you'd recognize immediately. I woke up around 2 in the morning and heard Gordon in his office down the hall. He kept the door closed when he was working, which was normal. He often stayed up late reviewing property files. At least that was what he always said. But when I walked past, I heard him speaking quietly, almost in a murmur, and then go completely silent in the way people do when they hear footsteps. I knocked. He opened the door fast. His face settled into a neutral expression a half-second too late for me to miss what came before it. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He nodded. "Just going over some rental projections." "You should go back to bed." He closed the door behind me after I turned to leave. I heard the lock click. I stood in the hallway for a moment, thinking about how I'd never noticed him locking that door before. That's how it begins, I think. Not with explosions. With small sounds in the middle of the night and a lock you'd never paid attention to. After that, I started noticing more. Gordon became tense around the mail. Not obviously tense, just slightly faster to get to the box before I did. He started taking phone calls in the garage. He began shredding things, not unusual for someone in property management, but more often, and with the kind of focus that made it seem deliberate rather than routine. One afternoon I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard him on the phone downstairs. His voice was low, but the house carries sound in a way he'd never quite figured out. "It's already been moved," he said quietly. "No. She doesn't ask about that side of things. She, not Beverley. She." I set down the shirt I was folding and stood very still until he came upstairs 20 minutes later, talking about what he wanted for dinner. I didn't say a word, but I started paying a different kind of attention. Several weeks after that, our daughter Leanne called from her apartment in Hamilton. I could hear it in her voice before she said anything. That particular quality of exhaustion that only heartbreak and fear can produce. "Mom," she said, "I need to talk to you and Dad." She came over that Sunday with my grandson Noah, who was 6 and very quiet in the way children get when they can sense something is wrong, but don't have language for it yet. Leanne sat at our kitchen table, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Marcus emptied the joint account," she said. "He's already got a lawyer. I need help getting one too." I reached across the table and took her hand. "How much is the retainer?" "Around 4,000, she said quietly. "Maybe a bit more. And I need first and last for a new place. Marcus is staying in the apartment and I can't afford to keep it on my own." I knew what I wanted to say. Of course, you're our daughter." But Gordon spoke first. He leaned back slightly in his chair. $4,000 isn't nothing, Leanne." She blinked. "I know that, Dad." Gordon rubbed his jaw in the way he did when he was calculating something. "We're stretched right now. The timing isn't great." I looked at him, stretched. He glanced at me. "We've talked about this, Beverley. We've got the furnace coming up, and the roof is going to need attention before spring." Leanne looked down at her hands. "It's okay. I'll figure it out." "No," I started. But Leanne had already stood up, gathering Noah's jacket from the chair. She had her mother's pride. She wasn't going to argue. "Dad always knows what to do," she used to say when she was small. She didn't say it anymore. After she left with Noah, I slipped $300 from my emergency cash into her coat pocket. Money I'd been quietly putting aside from grocery budgets for years. A 20 here, a 40 there, kept in an envelope inside a box of Christmas ornaments in the basement. It wasn't enough for a legal retainer. It wasn't close. But Leanne found it in the parking lot, called me crying, and said it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. Meanwhile, Gordon sat in the living room watching the Saturday game, and I stood at the kitchen sink feeling something new, not sadness exactly, something harder. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for a long time. I started replaying things I had not let myself replay before. The time we couldn't afford to visit my mother in Fredericton when she was sick. The year I wanted to take a business course and Gordon said the timing wasn't right. The vacation we'd been meaning to take for our 25th anniversary that kept getting pushed back until we stopped mentioning it. Always something. Always the timing. The next morning I found a piece of mail Gordon had already opened and set aside. It was from a financial institution I didn't recognize. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except that the return address was a private wealth management firm in downtown Calgary. Gordon's name on the envelope. No account number visible. Just his name and that address. I wrote the firm's name down on a notepad in my kitchen and then tore it out and tucked it in my pocket. That evening, Gordon left for a property management networking dinner. I sat with my laptop at the kitchen table and searched the firm's name. It was real, registered, a small private investment advisory company that handled what the website called discrete wealth, structuring for long-term clients, discrete. That word sat with me. I kept searching. Property records in Alberta, business registrations, and eventually I found a numbered company, registered in Calgary, with a registered agent I didn't recognize. One Victor Chalmers. The name meant nothing to me until I thought about it longer, and then, slowly, it did. Victor Chalmers was Gordon's cousin, 10 years younger, quiet, unmarried, worked remotely in financial compliance. Gordon had mentioned him occasionally over the years. We'd seen him twice at family gatherings. That was all I knew, but his name was on documents connected to a numbered company, and that company was connected to the same financial firm that had mailed my husband a letter. I closed the laptop when I heard Gordon's car in the driveway. I went upstairs, turned off the light, and pretended to be asleep. I heard him move through the house carefully, checking the locks, setting the alarm, pausing briefly outside the bedroom door before going back downstairs to his office. I heard the lock click again. I didn't sleep for a very long time. 2 weeks later, I found the coat. It was the end of October, first real cold snap of the year. I was rotating the closet, pulling out the heavier things from the back, and Gordon's charcoal wool overcoat was bunched at the end. I shook it out to hang it properly and felt something shift in the inner pocket. The lease was for a condo unit in downtown Calgary. 1,200 square feet. Underground parking. A terrace. The monthly rent was higher than our mortgage payment had been at its peak. The lease start date was 14 months earlier. I read it twice. The name on the lease was the numbered company. Gordon had been paying for a condo in Calgary for over a year. I put the lease back. I made the tea. I sat at the kitchen table in the early evening dark and tried to understand what kind of husband paid for a downtown condo, while his wife drove a car with a slipping transmission, and his daughter begged for $4,000 for a legal retainer. The next 3 days I went through the motions. I made meals. I asked about his day. I smiled when appropriate. Gordon seemed to notice nothing different, which told me something about how invisible I had become inside my own marriage. When you've disappeared slowly enough, nobody notices the last few degrees of the fade. On the 4th day, I drove to the public library. Not because I couldn't search at home, but because I didn't want anything on our home network. I spent 2 hours going through business registry filings, property records, and corporate documents available through Alberta's public databases. The numbered company had been active for 9 years. 9 years. I read that 3 times. There were financial instruments tied to it, investment vehicles, accounts I couldn't access the details of but could confirm existed, and Victor Chalmers was listed as sole director, though an older archived filing showed a second director, removed 4 years later. The second director's name wasn't Gordon's, it was a woman's name I didn't recognize. Patrice Fowler. I wrote both names down carefully. Then I drove home and made dinner and set the table for 2. The following Saturday, while Gordon was golfing with a client, I called a family law lawyer, whose name I'd found through the Law Society of Ontario's referral directory. Her name was Rosalind Kerr, and she'd been practicing family law in Burlington for 22 years, with a specific focus on complex asset disclosure cases. Her office was quieter than I expected. Wood floors, a plant in the window, 2 chairs that faced each other rather than a desk between us. She shook my hand and sat down and listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been managing the household finances together?" she asked. "I have never managed them," I said. "Gordon managed everything." I knew what he chose to tell me. Rosalind Kerr nodded in the slow way of someone confirming what they already suspected. She reached for the copies I'd brought, the lease, the firm name, the numbered company filings. She read through them carefully, turning pages with the kind of methodical attention that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, like I wasn't losing my mind. "What you've described, Beverley," she said finally, "is a pattern of deliberate asset concealment. The structure of a numbered company held by a family associate, combined with a private wealth management firm, and a secondary property you had no knowledge of, that's not an oversight. That's a system." I looked at my hands in my lap. "A system." She nodded. "How long has your husband been in property management?" 28 years. She tapped the lease gently. Then he knew exactly what he was doing. I asked her what I should do. She gave me the same kind of answer I hadn't expected. The answer that wasn't emotional at all. The answer that was entirely about clarity. First, do not confront him yet. Document everything you can access quietly. Open a private account in your name at a branch you don't normally use. And do not change your behavior at home in any noticeable way. Do not change your behavior. I almost laughed. I'd been managing Gordon's emotional temperature for 26 years. I was very good at not changing my behavior. I drove home afterward in the October cold and sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. Gordon was already home, standing at the kitchen counter heating up soup. He looked at me when I came in. "Where'd you get to?" "Errands," I said. "Stopped for coffee." He nodded and turned back to the stove. and for just a moment, I looked at the back of his head and thought, "You still think you're the only one who knows how to plan?" That thought became the thing that steadied me for everything that followed. Over the next several weeks, I built a quiet file, not at home. On a tablet I bought secondhand and kept in a bag in my car. I documented every piece of information I could find through public records. I photographed the lease each time Gordon left the coat in the hallway. I wrote down dates, amounts, names. Then I asked my daughter Leanne to meet me for lunch. Not at our house. We sat in a booth at a coffee shop near her new apartment and I told her the short version. Not everything, just enough. That I'd found something that didn't make sense. That I was being careful. That she shouldn't say anything to Paul yet. Leanne stared at me across the table for a long moment. She's always been perceptive, my daughter. Even as a child, she could feel the emotional temperature of a room before she crossed the threshold. "Mom," she said quietly, "how long have you known something was wrong?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Maybe longer than I let myself admit. She reached across and took my hand. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm here." That sentence gave me more strength than I'd expected. Because I had spent so many years believing that decisions of this size were not mine to make. The piece that I couldn't let go of was Victor Chalmers. What exactly had he agreed to? Had he known? Was he complicit? Or had Gordon used him the way Gordon used most people? By making everything sound reasonable and practical, until you were already deep inside the arrangement. Rosalind had advised me not to contact anyone connected to Gordon's financial structure. But knowing who Patrice Fowler was felt important. It felt like the missing piece that would make everything else make sense. I found her through a professional registry. Patrice Fowler was a retired financial planner from Red Deer. In her mid-60s. She'd left practice 8 years ago. There was nothing unusual in her public profile. Nothing that suggested wealth or scandal. Just a woman who'd retired and apparently stepped away from things. But her name had been on Gordon's company filing and then been removed. I drove to Red Deer on a gray Wednesday in November. I told Gordon I was visiting an old colleague from my bookkeeping days for a couple of nights. He didn't ask for details. He never had. Patrice Fowler lived in a small bungalow on a quiet street with a well-kept yard and a car in the driveway with a faded parking permit from a community center. She answered the door looking cautious. Then she looked at me for a long moment and something shifted in her expression. "You're Gordon's wife," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "My name is Beverley." She stepped back from the door. "You'd better come in." Her house smelled like coffee and old paperbacks. Nothing about it looked like someone who'd benefited from hidden money. She sat across from me and folded her hands and said, before I'd even asked my question, "I've been wondering if this day would come." She had met Gordon 20 years ago at a professional conference in Calgary. He'd seemed trustworthy, smart. He'd approached her with a proposal for a consulting arrangement that would allow her to earn extra income by acting as a silent administrative partner in a numbered company. Everything structured to keep it separate from family finances, he'd said. She hadn't asked what that meant. She'd assumed it was routine. It wasn't until several years in that she began to understand what the company was actually doing. "Sheltering money," she said quietly, moving it around in a way that reduced what would be considered marital assets. I looked at her steadily. He was planning to leave me. She closed her eyes briefly. I think he was planning to have options. Whether he ever would have acted on it, I can't say. But the structure was designed for someone who wanted to be able to walk away with a great deal more than their spouse would ever know existed. I sat very still in her living room for a while. Outside the window, the November light was flat and gray. I thought about 26 years of, "We have to be smart." I thought about the Christmas ornament box and the $300 in 20s. I thought about Leanne at our kitchen table asking for $4,000 while Gordon calculated the cost of the furnace. Patrice spoke again, quietly. I should have stopped being involved a long time ago. By the time I understood it fully, I'd already signed too many things. He made me feel like pulling out would create more problems than staying. I recognized that feeling instantly. "That's how it works," I said. "He makes leaving feel like the irresponsible choice." She looked at me with something that might have been relief. "You understand him very well." "I do," I said. "I just stopped making that mistake for him." She agreed to cooperate with my lawyer. She had copies of documents she'd kept for her own protection over the years, things she'd never shown anyone, things she said she'd been afraid to use and equally afraid to destroy. She handed them to me in a sealed envelope, and I drove back to Ontario with them on the passenger seat. I told Rosalind everything the following week. She reviewed Patrice's documents carefully, adding them to what I'd already gathered. The picture that emerged was substantial. Not tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands, moved over nearly a decade through a structure carefully designed to be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. We built our case over the next 2 months. Gordon noticed nothing, or if he did, he said nothing. He continued being the Gordon he had always been in the evenings, reasonable, mild, occasionally affectionate, in a mechanical way that I now understood, had always been about maintaining equilibrium rather than genuine connection. One night in January, he came to sit beside me on the sofa while I was reading, and said, out of nowhere, we should take that trip we talked about. The East Coast thing. Maybe this summer. I looked at him. The trip we'd been postponing for 7 years. Sure, I said. That would be nice. He patted my hand and went back to his chair. That night I lay awake listening to him breathe and thought about the condo in Calgary. I wondered if he'd imagined being there. Being someone different. I wondered if the version of himself I'd been building for the last 9 years had ever included me at all. I already knew the answer. The morning I signed my name. At the bottom of the divorce application, Rosalind's office felt unusually quiet. February light coming through the window. A cup of tea I'd been given and was holding more for warmth than anything else. I thought about our wedding. I thought about the first apartment. The drafty one near Yonge Street with the radiator that clanged all winter. I thought about the night Leanne was born, and Gordon's face in the delivery room. The real version of him, the one that existed before everything calcified. Then I thought about Leanne asking for $4,000, and being told the timing wasn't great. And I signed. Rosalind had asked me a few days earlier how I wanted Gordon to be served. I'd thought about it for a long time. Then I told her. That evening Gordon came home from a property inspection in Mississauga. He dropped his bag at the door, said he was tired, said he was going to check some paperwork before dinner. I said, okay, I'll start on dinner in a bit. He went to his office. I heard the door, then the familiar sounds. The drawer, the filing cabinet, then. Nothing for a long time, then. Beverley. Not loud. Just my name. Said the way someone says a word when they've just lost their footing. I walked to the office doorway. He was standing at his desk, holding the envelope Rosalind had prepared. It had been in the middle of the file he kept for the numbered company documents, the ones I had photographed and returned, copies of which were already with my lawyer, with Rosalind, and with a secure external backup I'd set up with Leanne's help. He looked at the envelope. Then he looked at me. What is this? You know what it is, I said. He opened it slowly. He read the first page. The color changed in his face in a way I had never seen in 26 years. You went through my files. I've been going through your files for 3 months, I said, and your filing cabinet, and the Calgary property registry, and corporate records, and I drove to Red Deer in November. At that last part, something shifted in his expression. A specific kind of fear. Not of the divorce papers, of Patrice. He sat down. For Gordon Hale, a man who had been steady and deliberate and controlled for every single day I had known him, sitting down in the middle of a conversation felt like collapse. You talked to her, he said. I did. He rubbed both hands over his face. That's not what it looks like. I leaned against the doorframe. Gordon, you've been running a numbered company through your cousin and a retired financial planner for 9 years. You've been moving marital assets into it in a way that was designed to be invisible to me. You have a condo in Calgary. I've never seen, and you told our daughter you couldn't afford to help her when she needed a lawyer for her own divorce. He said nothing. What was the plan? I asked. Retire and disappear. He looked at his hands, It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He opened his mouth, closed it. For once, the reasonable explanation didn't come. Leanne called just then. I let it go to voicemail. I would call her back in a few minutes with news she had been waiting weeks to hear. Gordon finally looked at me directly. How did you know to start looking? The coat, I said. Your coat with the lease inside, back in October. He stared. Then he let out a breath that seemed to deflate something in him permanently. I told myself it was insured. I told myself it didn't matter if it fell out. I looked at him steadily. Because you never thought I'd know what to do with it. He didn't deny it. That non-denial hurt more than 100 explanations would have. Because it confirmed what I had been beginning to understand for months. Gordon had not built the system out of hatred. He'd built it out of confidence. Confidence that I would never think to look. That I'd been too small inside our own marriage to understand what I was seeing, even if I found it. I asked him once, near the end of that conversation, whether any of it had been real. He looked out the window for a long moment. Then he said, "The early years were, and strangely, that made it easier, not harder. Because it meant I hadn't imagined the person I fell in love with. He had existed. He'd just spent a long time becoming someone else, slowly enough that neither of us had marked the exact moment it changed." The mediation process took 6 weeks. Rosalind was methodical and composed throughout. Victor Chalmers cooperated when it became clear that Patrice's documentation made cooperation his better option. The assets from the numbered company were brought into disclosure. Gordon's lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Park, worked hard to soften the characterizations, but the paper trail made softening difficult. At one point, Jeffrey Park said something about Gordon managing family finances responsibly throughout the marriage. Rosalind slid 3 pages across the table without saying a word. One was a record of the furnace estimate Gordon had cited when Leanne asked for money. The second was the Calgary condo lease. The third was a wire transfer record showing a 6-figure movement into the numbered company. The same month Gordon had told Leanne the timing wasn't right. Jeffrey Park did not use the phrase responsibly managed again. Paul came to see me the week after mediation concluded. He'd been quieter than Leanne throughout the process, processing things in the way he always had, slowly and privately. He sat at my kitchen table with his hands around a mug and didn't speak for a few minutes. Then he said, "Mom, I thought I knew him." "I know. How do you?" He started, then stopped. "How does someone do that for that long without it showing?" I thought about it honestly. "It shows," I said. "We just didn't know we were allowed to name it." Paul nodded slowly. He looked young in that moment, younger than his age, and I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. This doesn't end with you," I told him. "It ends with me." He cried a little after that. So did I. Not for Gordon, not exactly. For the version of our family we had thought we were. For all the years when the 4 of us around a table had seemed like enough. When I hadn't yet understood what was happening beneath it. Gordon sent me a message 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized. 3 sentences. He said he hadn't wanted it to end this way. He said he hoped I would understand eventually. He said he missed the house, not me. The house. I sat on my porch and read it twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went back to deadheading, the roses I'd transplanted from the old garden. The ones I'd dug up and brought with me when I moved into my place in Burlington. Small house. Good light in the mornings, a yard big enough for Noah to run in when he comes on Sundays. The roses transplanted better than I expected. The first spring after the move they came back, fuller than they had in years. And I thought about what that means, about things that grow better when they're finally in the right conditions. About how long I'd been trying to bloom in ground that hadn't been tended honestly. Leanne's case settled too, not long after mine. She found a small house to rent near good schools. Noah started 2nd grade and made a best friend named Cooper and came to show me a drawing he'd done of our Sunday dinners. 4 people at a round table with what appeared to be an extremely large cat in the corner, which he explained was actually a dog named Biscuit, which we do not have but which he intends to persuade me to get. I'm considering it. I went back to work, part-time, for a bookkeeping firm in Burlington that does accounts for small businesses. My boss is a woman in her 40s who thanked me in my 2nd week for catching an error no one else had noticed in 3 months. I came home that evening and stood in my kitchen, feeling something I had trouble naming at first. Then I recognized it. It was the feeling of being useful in a way that was entirely my own. Paul visits most weekends. He's been more attentive since everything happened, more deliberate about showing up, which I think is his way of working through something. He's not quite ready to say out loud yet. That's all right. I can wait. I've learned to be patient with the things that matter. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who stood in that front hallway in October with a lease in her hands and went still instead of falling apart. I didn't know then that the stillness was strength. I thought it was shock. But looking back, I think some part of me had been preparing for a long time. The envelope in the Christmas ornament box. The notes I'd kept to myself over years. The instincts I'd spent 26 years being quietly trained to distrust. If there is one thing I want to say to you, wherever you're watching from tonight, it's this. Your instincts are not symptoms. They are information. If something has felt wrong for a long time, and you've been talking yourself out of it, because the person across from you is calm and reasonable, and very good at making you feel like the one who doesn't understand, please hear me. Calm is not the same as honest. Reasonable is not the same as right. And the fact that you can't immediately prove something doesn't mean your instincts are wrong. I was 63 years old when I found that lease. People said to me afterward with kindness that starting over at that age must have been frightening. And it was. I won't pretend otherwise. But the thing about being frightened of a new beginning is that it eventually gives way to something else. Not courage, exactly. Just the quiet discovery that you are more capable than you were ever encouraged to believe. Gordon thought he knew me well enough to be invisible. He just didn't account for the possibility that one day I would finally start looking. I'm glad I did. If this story stayed with you, I would really love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to trust your own instincts against everything telling you not to? Tell me about it. And wherever you're watching from in Canada tonight, let me know. Your stories matter here, and so do you.